In this documentary, I will take you guys through how it all started, how these two communities fought for their land, and what happened, what were the consequences, how everything happened, and through the time, how they managed to conclude it, how they managed to bring up solutions. It will include the wars that happened in 1948 and 1967, and today, what's happening in these societies, in these people, how they are living their lives. So we'll go through it. Now, first of all, let me take you straight to the beginning, like how it all started and where it took place. This is the history of Israel and Palestine. Through the centuries, the land we now call Israel and Palestine changed hands many times as different groups of people battled for the control of the area. Over time, the establishment of Jewish, Christian, and Muslim religions made the land, especially the city of Jerusalem, a uniquely holy place. For about 1,000 years in the Middle Ages, the Arabs almost always held control of the area and actually lived relatively peacefully with the Jews. In fact, it was the Christians during their brief rule massacred and persecuted both the Jews and Muslims. Around 1900, the idea of statehood had firmly taken place in the world, and so naturally many Jews wanted a country of their own. But in the 2000 years since the founding of Judaism, most Jews had left the Promised Land and spread around the world. With the goal of creating their own country now achievable, a large number of Jews started to come back and settle in Palestine. Now let's talk about the after effects of the World War I. What really happened after the World War I? The World War I brought the defeat of the Ottoman Empire at the hands of the British, French, and Russians, giving them control of the Middle East. They divided it up, and the British were given a mandate over Palestine. With the more sympathetic British now in control, these Jewish Zionists seized the opportunity to accelerate their plan for a separate state. But creating a state for the Jews wasn't really the goal of the British, who just wanted to create their government in Palestine, where power could be shared peacefully by the different groups of people living there. And then there were the Arabs, who didn't trust the British as well as the Jews, because many of the Arab leaders thought that the British would favor the Jews. So, the Arabs refused to form any government that could include the Jewish participation. This stubbornness then grew into frustration at not being represented, so some within the Arab community turned into violence and carried out bombings against the Jewish settlers and started to destroy the crops the Jewish were growing on their farms. About a decade later, World War II broke out. At that time, millions of Jews were killed by the Nazis in the Holocaust. After the American, British, and Allied forces defeated the Germans, hundreds and thousands of Jews came to Palestine, and the UN General Assembly passed a plan to divide up Palestine into independent Arab and Jewish states, with all the important city of Jerusalem placed under international control. But the 5 members of the Arab League didn't want the Jewish to control any part of the land, so they all voted against the plan. In May 1948, after the much planning and covert arms acquisition, the Jewish leadership went ahead and declared the establishment of the State of Israel, and quickly convinced the US government, the Soviet Union, and many other countries to officially recognize it. As expected by the Israelis, the Arab countries invaded Palestine immediately, but the Israelis were ready and were more disciplined, better trained, and well armed, and were too strong for their Arab enemies. When the dust settled after 10 months of fighting, peace agreements were signed. Israel not only kept the whole area under the original UN plan, it also controlled almost 60% of the land that had been planned for the Arab state. More than 7,000 Palestinian Arabs has also fled the fighting or were kicked out of their homes, and about the same amount of Jews migrated into Israel from Arab lands. So, you had about 1.5 million people basically switching places and making the population of Israel much more Jewish. A generation later, in 1967, tensions were again reaching the boiling point. There had been some deadly cross-border attacks from both the Israelis and the Arabs. So Israel decided to launch a surprise invasion, and in 6 days, they won the control of the Gaza Strip and Sinai, Egypt, took the West Bank in the East Jerusalem from the Jordan, and kicked Syria out of the Golan Heights. Fewer than 1,000 Israeli troops were killed in the short war, but over 20,000 Arab soldiers died. went missing or were captured. And just like the 1948 war, hundreds and thousands of more Palestinian Arabs were left. Since then, Israel really built up its security capabilities and constructed many settlements in the newly occupied territories. Even though the UN and the National Court of Justice declared the settlements legal under the international law. 10 years after the war, Israel returned the Sinai to Egypt and in 2005 pulled its troops and settlers out of the Gaza Strip. But there were around 750,000 Jewish settlers in the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Golan Heights. In 1993, Israel made a deal with the leader of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, Yasser Arafat, and agreed to allow the Palestinians to set up a government and rule themselves in the Gaza Strip and in the West Bank. In exchange, the PLO recognized the right of Israel to exist. This new Palestinian government, headed by Arafat, became known as the Palestinian Authority and was controlled by the majority party Fatah. But not all Palestinians, especially the people of the Gaza Strip, liked Arafat's modern approach, so a split took place, and leading to the rise of more extremist Islamic party, Hamas, whose leaders refused to negotiate with Israel or recognize its right to exist. In 2006, Hamas won the Palestinian parliamentary elections, but the majority party, Fatah, refused to be a minority party, and the violent power struggle between Fatah and Hamas played out on the streets of Gaza. After more than 100 people died in the fighting, Hamas controlled the area. So Arafat's successor, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, cut the Gaza Strip loose from the Palestinian Authority and set up an emergency. Fatah controlled the government in the West Bank. So today there are two fairly different Palestines. One is the West Bank led by Abbas and Fatah party, who more or less live peacefully with the Jewish neighbors. Although Israel is in the process of building a 400 miles long barrier along the border. It's Abbas who's engaged ongoing negotiations with the Israel and international community about reaching a solution to the conflict that would allow Palestine to become an independent country. The other Palestine is the Gaza Strip, which is essentially poor and mostly cut off with the world by Israel and the wall which divides it from Israel and Egypt, leaving its people without the many basic necessities, including clean drinking water. Gaza is very dependent on the UN and the rest of the international community for aid. It's controlled by Hamas. Khalid Mashal is the chairman of Hamas and has led the party since the 2004 assassination of the Hamas leader al-Rantisi. Mashal, though, lives in Qatar. In 1997, Israel tried but failed to assassinate him in retaliation of the bombing of a market in Jerusalem that Hamas claimed responsibility for. It's Hamas who's been the target of the repeated Israeli military actions, recently including the 2015's Operation The Protective Edge, which was response to a number of attacks by Hamas against Israelis, including kidnappings and rocket attacks, both of which have been aided by the digging of the tunnels under both the Gaza-Israeli border and the Gaza's southern border with Egypt. Hamas uses these tunnels to smuggle weapons and money that it gets from others in the region who have interest in destabilizing the Israeli security. And its response to Hamas, Israel has taken heavy criticism for the destructive and vengeful airstrikes that kill a number of civilians. Now we'll discuss about the way forward, that what would be the way forward for the conclusion of all this matter. There is generally two ideas for how to end the conflict and give Palestinian statehood. First is a two-state solution where Israel and Palestine would be two sovereign countries living side by side. This is the strategy embraced by many in the international community, including the former US President Barack Obama and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his party. But time after time, negotiations around the solutions failed because of the many issues it has to confront and resolve, like what to do about the 750,000 Jewish settlers in Palestinian areas, the instability of the Gaza Strip, the fact that the Gaza Strip and the West Bank are even connected, and of course, who would control Jerusalem. These obstacles have given rise to a second alternative solution that's embraced by many Arab Israelis, even Jewish politicians like the President of Israel, Reuven Rivlin. They think that the only practical way to go is one state solution, compromise where neither the Palestinian nor the Jewish people get exactly what they want, but instead be unified in one single state that will ensure equal rights for all of its citizens. Proponents of this plan think that it would solve one of the world's toughest problems and remove the entire area from the criticism of the modern world. The main argument from the Israelis against the one-state solution is that it would instantly end the idea of the Jewish state and would make Jews a minority again. But looking at the numbers on the combined Arab-Israeli state, Jews would number 6.6 million and Arabs around 5.6 million. But of course, that before the issue of the people migrating back to its unified country and settled. Another issue that would require a creative solution is the wealth gap between the technological driven and the very prosperous economy of Israel and much more challenging economic situation of the Palestinian territories. Thanks for watching. Hopefully this video helps you see the situation with clear eyes and help you understand what's really happening there. Thank you so much.